The 2024-2025 FAFSA will not be released until December of 2023. This is gonna be a delayed release. As you know, if you filled out the FAFSA before, you usually expect to fill out the FAFSA starting October 1st. Let's go through some of those top changes you need to be made aware of. We're gonna be keeping you up to date on our YouTube channel, our TikTok channel, Instagram, Facebook, all those great social media channels. So make sure you stay on top of following us and checking edvisors.com for the latest information. The reason for the delay is the FAFSA Simplification Act. That means there's going to be some major changes coming to the FAFSA, and it's been a while since we've seen significant changes. There's some things you should know, and we're going to go over some of them. This does not mean this is all the changes that will be coming to the FAFSA. As we get through different drafts and seeing how the FAFSA is going to work, we're going to be updating you the best we can. The FAFSA Simplification Act really wanted to make this application simpler. It's actually going to be shorter than you've seen it in the past. There's going to be less questions asked. If you complete the FAFSA online using either a mobile device or a desktop, you're going to see what's known as skip logic. The skip logic feature has been used on electronic versions of the FAFSA for years, so that's not going to be new. But the way the questions are answered, it's going to help with that skip logic to only really present those questions that apply to you and make sure that you only are answering questions you need to answer. There's going to be less questions that apply to you, so hopefully the whole application is easier. When it comes time to complete this application, people do get anxiety about it. They feel like it's cumbersome, there's a lot of questions, it's asking a lot of information. And until you get into it, people don't feel like they're. I always say, as soon as the FAFSA is released, start filling it out. You actually can save the application if you're doing it online and come back to it later if you do need to figure something out or you need to understand a little bit more of what the question's asking you. So yes, it can be very complicated for some. I will say most people, the application is pretty straightforward, but there are some people who are going to have situations that are different, that are going to be a little bit more difficult to navigate, or there's some sort of strategy they're trying to implement which can make it a little bit more difficult. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means that, give yourself the time that you need. 2 questions are going to be completely gone. So last year in the 2023-2024 FAFSA, they still had the question asking if you were registered for selective service, and they were asking you if you had any drug convictions. Even though those questions were presented, it didn't matter how you responded to them because it would not have affected your financial aid. I know I said there's been a lot of changes coming. Some of them are very similar to the offerings of the past, but they've been modified for this upcoming FAFSA. One of those, it's going to be more clear if you need to include your assets or not. In the previous years of the FAFSA, there was a simplified needs test or an auto zero EFC, expected family contribution. And that's going to change a little bit. If you're completing the FAFSA through an electronic method, if you're doing it on a desktop, on a mobile device, that sort of thing, that skip logic is going to help you here because it's going to eliminate your need to include assets if you meet certain criteria. That's happening in the background for you. And if you are not required to provide asset information, you won't need to provide that. It'll be very clear as you go through if that scenario applies to you. If you are being presented with asset questions, it's always best to answer the questions presented to you and answer them honestly based on what they're asking. I always throw out words of caution there. This is a federal form and you want to be truthful when you are completing it. I'm not saying that mistakes don't happen and the adjustments need to be made later, but there's a difference between a mistake and then there's a difference of intentionally answering questions incorrectly or in a misleading way. When you complete the FAFSA, as you know, you will be providing income information and asset information. You as a student are required to provide this information. If the FAFSA considers you to be a dependent undergraduate student, it's going to ask you to provide this information on behalf of your parent or your parents. Now, anyone who needs to provide their information to the FAFSA is going to be considered a FAFSA contributor. Contributors will need to provide consent for their federal tax information to be transferred onto your FAFSA or to the U.S. Department of Education. It is required that every contributor provide this consent regardless if they filed their taxes or not. The way you answer the questions will let you know if your information can be transferred in or not. There will still be instances where the information cannot be transferred in, and even if you give consent, you will still need to manually input your income information or that federal tax information. You will see those income questions and they do need to be completed. If you're a dependent undergraduate student or an independent undergraduate student, this doesn't apply to you if you are a graduate student, essentially over the age of 24, and there's a few other instances where this may not apply, even if those two scenarios don't exist. Those typically are the most common reasons. Every graduate student is an independent student, so this is only really applying to that undergraduate level. Dependent undergraduate students, like I said before, will need to provide parent information. If your parents are married and living together, it's pretty simple. You know you have to provide the information of both your parents. If your parents are separated, not living together, if they're divorced, if they were never married, there's a lot of different scenarios out there. It may not be that straightforward. And the way you determine your FAFSA parent is changing for the 2024-2025 FAFSA. It's very important to determine who that is. And because it changed, it's not going to be the same method you saw before. Let's talk about what the method is going to be. So what you're going to be looking at is the parent who provided you with the most financial support. Now, if you can go back and see that it's been 50-50 support, 50% from each parent, then you would actually choose the parent with the highest adjusted gross income and provide their information on the FAFSA. That is extremely different from the way it was before. In the past, 2023, 2024 FAFSA and prior, it was the parent that you lived with the most during the previous 12 months. If that was 50-50 or unable to be determined, then you would look at the parent who provided you with the most financial support for the last 12-month period that you received financial support. So if you're in a situation where you had to figure this out in the past, make sure you read that question carefully and you read all the information on that question to make sure you're providing the correct information for the correct parent. Now this one's going to be different. So if you were a dependent undergraduate student, in the household side for your FAFSA parent, they would list every member of the household and they would indicate if any of those members of the household, like your siblings, would be enrolled in college at the same time. And when you would indicate that someone else would be in college at the same time as you, one of your siblings, your parent would get a discount on their expected family contribution. That is now going away. So you will not be indicating if there's another student or another sibling of yours going to college at the same time, and that's not going to be taken into consideration for the parent's family as a whole when they're completing a FAFSA for each student. Remember, the FAFSA belongs to the student. So even if you have another sibling going to college at the same time as you, you would each need to complete the FAFSA separately. There still will be easier ways to get your parents' information transferred back and forth without you having to necessarily start from scratch, but this discount or adjusted EFC for having multiple children in college at the same time is going away. So you fill out the entire FAFSA. You get to the very end, everything's submitted, and you're waiting to see that expected family contribution. That's the number you heard about, that's the number you've seen online, that's the one you had in years past to get an understanding of where you stand in the world of financial aid. Expected family contribution, that term is going away. It's now going to be known as the Student Aid Index. One of the reasons they're doing this, while they're changing the way the Student Aid Index is going to be calculated as compared to the expected family contribution. Things like we talked about before, including that discount or adjustment for having more than one child in college at the same time. One of the reasons they changed the name is, even if you caught some of my previous FAFSA videos or financial need videos when we talk about the expected family contribution, I've always tried to emphasize the point that the expected family contribution is not necessarily the amount you're expected to pay to go to college. Some people pay way more than their expected family contribution, and some people pay way less or nowhere near their expected family contribution. And in some cases, Some people do pay their expected family contribution, and that's it. But it's really not supposed to be a number or a dollar figure. It really is supposed to be an index number that allows your financial aid office to compare your financial need to other students. So the student aid index is now called an index, so I no longer have to say the expected family contribution is an index. The student aid index has it now all in the same name. So that student aid index will help determine where you land and how you compare to other families that are attending the same institution as you. You may notice that your student aid index, especially if you have financial need, could be less than 0. It can be a negative number. That was never true with the EFC. So you might see a number that is less than 0 with that student aid index. Because of the changes with the EFC to the student aid index, some families may see that they now are going to qualify for a PELL grant, a federal PELL grant, that need-based grant, that may have never qualified for a federal PELL grant in the past with the old EFC number. This isn't going to be everyone, so I don't want to set false expectations out there. The way the FAFSA has changed has made it easier for certain students to qualify for Pell Grants that may not have qualified for Pell Grants in the past. So some families might like the new change to the SAI, and there will always be situations where someone doesn't necessarily think the SAI or that student aid index is beneficial for them. But this is the way the FAFSA is going to be enacted, and this is how it's going to work. One of the reasons that certain considerations won't be taken into consideration, we've heard from the U.S. Department of Education that they are really trying to stick a little bit closer to some of those IRS rules and classifications, and they're required to do that under that FAFSA Simplification Act. So because of that, we will see some people who benefit, and then we will see some people who don't feel like they benefit at all. We're going to have to see how this first year goes. So what do you need to be prepared for? We don't have a date for you. That might leave this a little bit open-ended. I would suggest that you keep visiting edvisors.com and reading the blog section, maybe signing up for a monthly newsletter or following us on social media. We're on most major social media platforms. You can find us on YouTube with these great videos, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can find us there, and we'll be keeping you up to date. You can also do other types of searches in order to get prepared for the upcoming FAFSA. Even though there's going to be some significant changes, that doesn't mean that the FAFSA is going to be impossible, and that doesn't mean that there isn't help available to get you through. You can check out our content. We have Ask the Edvisor on edvisors.com, where you can submit a question, and you always have the option to contact your financial aid office. This is the first time you're applying to college. You might have multiple schools that you're applying to. You can reach out to the financial aid at some of those prospective schools to help you through. Because there's a FAFSA delay, you might have a better understanding of where you're applying anyways, so you'll know how to get some help. Edvisor is giving away $2,500 towards your student loan payments every quarter. All you have to do is enter at edvisors.com/repayment-relief. Enter now, and you could be the one who can have your student loan payments covered.